Welcome to the Medium in the Middle podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie, the medium in the middle. This podcast is going to walk you through my journey into mediumship and how I came to realize that I could communicate with souls that have passed over. My adventure started just over a year ago when unusual situations started happening to me. It wasn't until I really started to pay attention to them that it all started to come together. I wrote down everything that I was experiencing this past year in a little black book, and this podcast is going to be a recap of all of those memories leading up to where I am today in my mediumship journey. I will be releasing new episodes every Tuesday, and I recommend listening to the podcast in order, starting with episode 1, as my story will unfold more week by week. If you would like to stay connected with me, follow me on Instagram at mediuminthemiddle. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 11. I know I said this last week, but I cannot believe that I am already at episode 11 and telling my story and my journey into mediumship. I am definitely getting to the point where I need to go back to my little black book and figure out what the next story was to make sure I'm telling everything in order, as now we're about a year ago, and as great as I think my memory is, I don't want to miss any details. So in episode 10, I talked about how I wanted to test this ability before I moved away. And I had brought a group of friends together and I ran a little test. So that episode happened on a Thursday. Now for the weekend, I was going home to Windsor to visit my family before I moved across the country. So on the drive home, I was just listening to music, and the same thing started happening with Frank's son when Josh came through, where I was driving and I just started to get all this information. So I had a feeling that this person was for my cousin, so I called my cousin right away on the drive home. And I said, hey, do you have an aunt or a cousin or someone whose name ends in na? The last two letters of their name, N-A or something, na. I couldn't think of an example of a name ending in na, but I said, I have this woman and she's older and I think she's for you, and she's talking about your brother's wedding, and she's talking about our other cousin was having a baby, but there was some complications at this time. So she was talking about how the baby is going to be okay and about how knows that there's some problems, but everything is going to be okay. So I was kind of saying, so it's also connected to your mom's sister. Like, who would this lady be? And my cousin was thinking, nah, like, whose name ends in nah? She's like, well, my mom, like, one of her aunts was named Marina. She's like, maybe it's her. And I was like, oh, maybe it is her. And then I was like, and that would make sense of why she's also talking about our cousin's baby, because that she would also be related to her. And she said, okay, well, like, why, how did that come through? And I was like, well, I was just driving and I started to get this information and I thought I would just call you. So because I was going to be seeing her the next day, she was kind of like, okay, Steph, we'll talk about this tomorrow. I'm going to ask my mom some more information. So I'm driving home to Windsor, and I know that this visit is going to be the last time I see my family for probably at least 6 to 8 months. And I knew that I would kind of have to tell them what was going on, or that it would somehow organically come up in conversation, and I would kind of have to explain myself. So my mom knew what was happening because obviously I talked to her on the phone often, and a few of my cousins knew just because we're close and we talk often. But when I go home to Windsor, usually, we all get together, the aunts and uncles and cousins. So I knew that everyone would be together. So whenever I go home to visit, my mom usually hosts a dinner and she invites the whole family over. It just makes it really easy to visit everyone. So it was one of the evenings where everyone was coming over. And before all of our family came over, one of my mom's friends was in the area, so she stopped by for coffee. So we were chatting with her, and she was just talking about how she was having headaches constantly, and she wasn't able to sleep well, and kind of just saying different things. And I was like, oh, like, I can help you with that. I can do some Reiki on you, and it's really good to help you sleep. And she said, oh, like, okay, I'd try anything. I haven't had a good night's sleep in years. So I said, okay, I'm going to cleanse you and clear you. I'll do it quickly, but it'll at least maybe help a little bit. So I saged her and I kind of did my thing. I Reiki'd her a little bit on her head. I had her sit down. I had her stand up. And I said, okay, like, that should be good. And then I started saying, and is your dad passed away? And she was kind of like, what? And I said, well, I'm also a medium. Well, I'm learning that I might be a medium, and I'm really getting energy about your dad. And she said, yeah, my dad passed away many years ago. She's like, well, what does he have to say? What does he have to say? She started getting really excited. And the look on my mom's face at this time was priceless, because I told my mom all these stories over the phone, but I don't think she ever really believed me. But when it started to happen in front of her, her jaw just dropped. She was silently watching us, and she said, so what is my dad saying? I was like, well, he's not saying anything yet, but he might start to talk soon. Like, from what I know, I just kind of have to wait until they tell me things, and then I'll tell you what he says. And she was getting really excited at this point, and she said, well, if I show you a picture of him, will that help? Like, can I show you a picture of him? And I said, okay, yeah, maybe show me a picture of him, because then it'll kind of confirm if that is the person that I'm kind of seeing in my mind's eye. She's going through her purse, and she grabs her phone, and then she's going through her phone trying to find this picture. And before she turns her phone over, I say, are you going to show me a black and white photo of your dad holding a bunch of flowers in his hand? Like, it seems like they're in front of a garden and he's holding a bunch of flowers. And at that exact same time, she turned to me the phone, and the picture was black and white photo. And she's like, oh, but he's not holding flowers, he's holding peanuts. But peanut flowers kind of look like flowers. And because the photo was black and white, even staring at the photos, I was like, okay, well, that looks like flowers to me. And she said, how did you know I was going to show you a black and white photo of my dad? And I said, I don't know. This is kind of just how it works. I'm learning right now, but I just start to get information, and then I'll just repeat it to you. So I said, okay, I think he's ready to talk now. So let's sit down and I'll go through everything he's saying. So first he started to talk about her brothers. So he went through each of her brothers, and he kind of went through each of their kids, and she confirmed the different, yes, this brother has 2 kids. Yes, this brother has 3 kids kind of thing. And then I said, and you have one brother that lives somewhere hot. And she's like, oh, that would be so-and-so. He lives in Florida. And I was like, okay. And then you have another brother who's always in the hockey rink. Oh, yeah, that would be so-and-so, because his kids both play hockey. And then I was saying, and he's showing me one brother golfing. I don't know if they used to golf together or if he lives somewhere where they golf. And she was like, oh, yeah, that would be so-and-so. And then she was kind of like, well, what about me? What does he have to say about me? Why is he talking about my brothers? So I kind of laughed, and I said, well, I can't control what he's saying, but now he is going to talk about you. So he's kind of talking about how you're going through a hard time right now, or there's a situation that you're in that's not going too well, or I don't know what's going on, but he's kind of showing me that you're in this difficult situation, and he wants you to know that it will get better, but it's going to take you some time. And he's telling me 2. So I don't know if that means 2 weeks, 2 months, or how long it's going to take, but it's going to be a little bit more time is kind of the point. And she was like, really? Can't it be faster? And na. And I was like, that's just what he's saying, so I'm going to tell you. And then again, I started to burp, and it started to go away. So I said, okay, when I burp, it's kind of over. So that's all the information that I have right now. And she was kind of like, wow, that was incredible. I can't believe that you knew all those things. How did you know I was going to show you a black and white photo before I even turned around my phone? And then my mom, she said to her friend, she knew about your brother. She's never met that brother. And she knew about the brother in Florida. How would she know your brother was in Florida? And she knew about so-and-so. How did she know? And you knew about, and I could just see the wheels turning. And it was a little funny for me, because I was like, finally, my mom will get it. My mom will understand. Because when you're telling these people stories, it's hard for her. She was kind of like, are you sure you knew that? Are you sure you didn't make that up? And I was like, no, how could I make that up? Where would this information come from if it wasn't coming from someone telling me? So that was a super cool experience. So before I move on to what happened that evening when my entire family came over, as an aside to that story, the next day, that friend texted my mom, and she said, hey, I slept like a baby last night. I haven't slept that great in 15 years. Tell Stephanie thank you so much for whatever she did. So it was really nice to get some feedback as well from someone else, where just like a little bit of Reiki and clearing and calming of the mind could really help her. So that was awesome to hear. So that night, my entire family came over for dinner. And after dinner, we were all chatting and talking. And this is kind of when this conversation started. So it was a lot of questions. I was telling them a lot of these stories. So I told them episode 1 and episode 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And they were kind of all like, well, okay, Steph. And then my cousin told them about how when I was driving, her Aunt Marina came through, and a lot of them there would be related to this Marina. And they were still like, how did you know her name? How did that happen? So then my one aunt was like, I really want to talk to my mom. Like, do you think you could talk to my mom? And I said, Holtu, it doesn't really work like that. It's on a telephone where I just pick it up and be like, bring, like, hello, heaven. It's more, I have to wait till they come. I don't know how to control this yet. It's all been random so far. So, no, like, I can't really get your mom. And then her kids were bothering me too. They were saying, just please get my mom's mom for her. It would mean so much to her. She would really want to talk to her mom, and it would just be really nice if you could do that. And I was like, guys, it doesn't work that way. Like, I just can't get whoever I want or, summon someone. I have to wait till they come. So all night they were kind of nagging me, please get my mom's mom, please. And I just couldn't. So as we were all sitting around the table, I was telling these stories to my family, and I said, my grandpa has passed away. And I said to my one uncle, I said, actually, Jidu has a message for you if you want it. And my uncle was really freaked out at this point, and he said, no, I don't want the message. He said, I don't want to know what he has to say. And I said, okay, then I won't tell you. He said, I'm too freaked out. I don't really like this. I don't want to know. And I said, okay, I won't tell you then. But then his wife was like, well, I want to know. Can you tell me? And I said, yeah, it's a simple, small message. Like, his dad just wants him to know that he knows about his youngest child, because his youngest child would have been born after my grandfather passed. So he just wanted his son to know that he knew about his youngest daughter. And she said, oh, that's nice. Like, that's a nice message. But my uncle didn't want to know, so I didn't tell him. So that same uncle has 3 boys and a daughter. So the 3 boys were kind of sitting across the table staring at me dumbfounded. And I was trying not to freak them out and tell too many ghost stories, but they were all kind of sitting there and they're younger. So my one cousin turns to me and he kind of says as a joke, like, well, if you're psychic, then what's Robert's girlfriend's name? And Robert yells, I don't have a girlfriend. And his brother yells back to him, yeah, you do. And then I smile at both of them and I say, her name's Jessica. And the 2 boys go, what? How do you know her name's Jessica? Her name's not Jessica. She's not my girlfriend. And at this whole thing, and everyone at the table was like, what? How did you know what her name was? And I was kind of like, I don't know. This stuff just comes to me. So now I kind of have my mom convinced. I have my cousins convinced because I've just kind of blown their socks off by knowing their girlfriend's name. And my aunts and my cousins are coming around as well. But my one aunt still really wants to talk to her mom. And she keeps pulling at my arm, being like, please, just get her, please. I said, I can't. I have nothing. So it's the end of the night and everybody is starting to leave. So that aunt was saying goodbye. And as we're getting up to say goodbye to her, I start to get information. So I pull my aunt aside and I say, okay, I'm getting information and I think this might be your mom, so let's sit down and figure out who it is. So I said, this woman has dark hair and she has big hips. She has dark, short hair and she's a bigger woman and she was in Lebanon. After talking through it, we figured out that it was actually her husband's mother. Because I said she is wanting to talk about her funeral that happened in Lebanon. So she said that she watches her son in his dreams, and she said that she was talking about the church in Lebanon, and it was called the St. Charbel Church, and it's on a hill. And with my hands, I started to motion how the church looks kind of thing, because it's kind of this big monument. And my mom said, that's how the church looks in Lebanon. That's how the church looks in Lebanon, the way that you're doing with your hands. And I was like, okay, so that's the church. And I see like a black car driving up to the church. Like, I feel like it's this winding road to get to the church. And they were like, yes, that's where she was buried. That's where they had her funeral. And I was like, okay. Well, she wanted to tell her son who was in Canada, who wasn't there. So I was telling his wife that the 3 boys in Lebanon, and my aunt was like, yeah, those are his brothers. I said, okay, well, whoever the 3 boys in Lebanon were, they took care of all the details. And she wanted to thank them for taking care of everything while they were there. And she also wanted to tell his son not to worry and that everything was taken care of properly in Lebanon. because he was kind of worrying that things weren't done this way or that way. And she said, no, everything was done good. I don't want you to worry. I just know that everything was well taken care of. And she said, you also hosted 2 masses for me here in Canada, and I want to say thank you for that. She says, I know that you couldn't make it to my funeral in Lebanon, but I want you to say thank you for hosting the mass for me here in Canada. And then she started to talk about his kids, who are all my cousins. So this was interesting. And the reason why I knew that it wasn't kind of me talking was because I know my cousins' names. And when the mother was coming through, she was saying, and your oldest does this, and your youngest does this. And I was just thinking to myself, I know the name of the oldest, and I know the name of the youngest. Why wouldn't I just say their name? But it's interesting that when spirit is taking over, it's not like my mind isn't in it. I'm just repeating things that people tell me, or that the spirits are telling me. So she wanted to first talk about the worry for the youngest and the oldest child. She said, you have a lot of worry for your oldest and your youngest. She said, you need to put down your worry bags because you worrying about your kids isn't going to help anything and you're only hurting yourself. She said, when I watch you in your dreams, I can feel how worried you are. And she said, don't worry. She said, you are still my child and she will worry about him as much as he is worrying about her kids. And she kind of went on this little tangent about how he really needs to put down his worry bags and she's his kid, so she's going to worry about him, but he needs to stop worrying about his kids. So then I was kind of like, because her son wasn't there, the dad wasn't there, it was just the mom, I was like, are you guys going to tell your dad? Like, this is kind of a lot of information to go back and tell him that his mom came and talked about the funeral, and she talked about the church, and she talked about, how she watches him in his dreams. Like, how are you going to tell him? Because he's a very religious man, and I don't think that this kind of information would go over well. And the kids were kind of like, no, dad needs to hear this. We think that mom can maybe tell him that she dreamt about it, or maybe she can say that she heard something, or maybe she can say that she just knows that his mom would say this kind of thing. So maybe we'll find a way to give him the information. And I said, okay, like if you want to tell him, you can tell him, but I won't tell him anymore because I told you guys and the message got through. And then that same aunt, it was her aunt whose name is Marina, so her mother's sister. So her mother's sister came through and her husband's mother came through, but not her mother. By the time this episode is released, I will be at home, so I will have updates for you about whether anything further came through. But it was a really cool experience where I had 30 of my family all around the table and we kind of had this other big experience. So after I had the group reading, I felt a lot more comfortable doing it in front of more than just one person, because before this, I could only do it one-on-one. I almost get nervous, or, it's kind of nerve-wracking to do this kind of work in front of other people, but I was becoming more comfortable and more comfortable. So I'm going to leave the story that happens next for another episode because it is going to be an entire entity. But this night kind of covered telling all of my family. So they were kind of now all in the loop. They all have essentially heard episode 1 to 5. And, I was telling them these crazy stories. I was telling them what was happening to me. I was telling them how I think I'm a medium, but I don't know what that is. I was telling them how I don't really know how to control it yet. And I was just sharing with them everything that I was experiencing. And because my family is supportive, they were very supportive of me. They were very nice. They listened to me. No one really didn't believe me, but they also didn't believe me at the same time. So they weren't like, oh, Steph, we don't believe you, but they were kind of like, okay, well, that's nice if you think you can do that. Once these experiences happened, definitely more people started to believe, and my cousin said it best. She said, Steph, don't expect anyone to believe until they have an experience with you that's so crazy they can't not believe it. She said, obviously I'll support you in whatever you want to do. She's like, but until you told me about my grandmother, she's like, I didn't even know those things about my grandmother's funeral. She's like, how in the world would you know those things about my grandmother's funeral? So she was kind of like, don't expect anyone to believe you because why would they? And I 100% agree with her because I don't expect anyone to believe me. Whether you have an experience with me or not, you don't have to believe this stuff. You don't have to believe in me. I don't think that's the purpose of my journey or this podcast. I really want this podcast to just make energy work more relatable. I want mediumship to seem more approachable. If you are open to options, there are options. And I want to really just share that I'm a regular person who was living a regular life until all these not regular things started happening to me. And if I didn't write them all down in a little book, I don't even know if I would have pieced it all together to make it make sense so quickly to me. Eventually, it would have, of course, made sense, but I definitely kind of caught on to it quickly. And because I have a very logically thinking brain, I needed to understand everything right away. I needed to know how this was working, how I could test it, how it was on, how it was off, how it works when it's on, what the burps mean, how I feel when it starts. That's why in the last episode, you heard about me testing so many different things because my brain needed to understand it. I needed to wrap my head around what was happening. And the only way I could do that was by testing it. So this is part 1 of me telling my family what was going on. Next episode will be part 2. I appreciate you all listening. Thank you for listening to the 11 episodes. It means so much to me. I love all your comments and messages. I read them all. If you do feel so inclined, I would love a rating and a review on the podcast. It really helps us get more exposure. And if you would like to stay connected with me, follow me on Instagram at mediuminthemiddle. So until next week, I will see you all later. Bye.